to disabled people, stop scaremongering and make sure they are understood, and that is exactly what our reforms and engagement is all about.
Number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Me again, Mr. Speaker. DWP ministers continue to have regular discussions on state pension inequality. We introduced a new state pension in 2016, which improves outcomes for many women. Outcomes will equalise for men and women by the early 2040s, over a decade earlier than under the previous system.
Speaker, some WASPI women in Bedford are living in severe financial hardship because of having their pension income stolen in some cases twice. Their right to compensation has been tested and won. So does the Minister agree with me that given a WASPI woman dies every 13 minutes, the compensation scheme needs to be set up immediately, and although it should not be a one-size-fits-all package, it must be simple, clear and easy to operate?
Mr. Speaker, I know this is a very emotive issue, and for those, all of us who have constituents who are worried about their pension aid, I would remind them that pension credit provides a safety net for people on low income, so do look at the benefits calculator on .co.uk. There will be a full debate on the Ombudsman's report tomorrow, and the Government will, of course, take all views into account as we identify and implement next steps. The Ombudsman report is complex, it's substantial, and its investigation covers 30 years. And I do appreciate all parties want to see it resolved as soon as possible. As our Secretary of State has said, there'll be no undue haste, and we will be listening to everyone.
Question 7, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. NHS England plans to make further changes to reporting on sex and gender in national data sets once the Unified Information Standard for Protected Characteristics has been approved and published. This will unify reporting on 8 of the 9 protected characteristics, including gender reassignment and sex.
I know that the Secretary of State agrees with me that vulnerable women, women with learning disabilities and all women should be able to access same-sex care, particularly with regards to intimate physical care. This is especially important in light of the report, the shocking report by Women's Rights Network and Joe Phoenix on rape and sexual assault in hospitals and care settings. This is why the proper collection of data based on sex is vital. Does she agree?
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. We are currently consulting on the NHS Constitution, which will give women not just the right to same-sex accommodation within hospitals, but the right to ask for someone of the same sex to conduct intimate examinations. There are safeguards, and we are looking at some of the incidents that are happening in trust to better protect patients, but also staff as well. And she's absolutely right to raise the issue of collecting that data to make sure that that is happening.
Kerry McCarthy.
Question 8, Mr. Speaker.
Question 8. Secretary.
So, Mr. Speaker, the Government has worked to advance equality of access to start-up opportunities irrespective of social background or race. We have a range of business support programmes and government-backed financial support through Help to Grow Management, Growth Hubs and the British Business Bank. The success of our endeavours to engage and support diverse business leaders can be seen in the data. In 2023, 44% of the 30,000 people in England helped by the Business Support Helpline were from ethnic minority backgrounds.
Thank the Minister for that response, although I found it a little bit difficult to hear it. But Bristol has a thriving and very entrepreneurial Somali community. But they say to me that one of the things that they constantly come across is that they're almost expected to set up businesses that just serve their own community rather than being part of mainstream regeneration efforts and the general commercial life of the city. So what is the Equalities Department doing to try to make sure that they can make that breakthrough out of just being community-based projects?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I think it's quite interesting that a number of people do have that perception that they should stay in their lane. This government does not support any sort of activity that is segregationist. We believe that we treat people equality. We must treat people equally under the law, and all of the access programs which we do have are available irrespective of ethnicity. People should be encouraged to serve the entire community, not just people who look and sound like them. Some of the schemes which I mentioned in my earlier answer are available, and I would like her to note that the Startup Loan Company reports that in her constituency 42 startup loans were issued to ethnic minority-led startups for about £315,000. So there are opportunities out there, and I'm happy to write to her with more information if she needs it.
Rachel Hopkins.
Topical 1.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, institutions should be able to operate free from ideological pressures. Despite Stonewall's attempt to have them stripped of their status at the UN, I am delighted that the EHRC have retained its accreditation as an A-status national human rights institution, denoting full compliance with the Paris Principles. As I have said before, Stonewall does not dictate the law in this country or indeed in the UN. Having retained their A-status, the Equality and Human Rights Commission retains its independent participation rights at the UN Human Rights Council and remains able to report directly to the United Nations on human rights issues.
Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. ONS data shows that 25.3% of women are economically inactive compared with 18.4% of men. And many women say access to flexible working could see them return to the paid workplace. What steps is the Minister taking alongside her Cabinet colleagues to ensure that all workers have access to flexibility in their working hours?
Secretary of State.
There is a lot that my department in particular is doing. We have put out multiple bits of legislation that will help to entrench workplace equality, whether it's around flexible working rights or around sexual harassment in the workplace. And there is more that we are doing even on the trade side. We continue to ensure that we have provisions which advance gender equality in our free trade agreements because we want to break down barriers and create opportunities for female entrepreneurs.
Andrew Jones. Popular man.
I'd like to raise an issue with the Minister that was raised with me at a recent constituency surgery. What is the government doing to ensure privacy and dignity for women is protected in toilet facilities?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. There are various reasons why women and men should be able to access single-sex spaces, and public toilets are no exception. So we are updating building regulations so that toilets in non-domestic buildings offer safety, privacy and dignity for all people who use them. There is often confusion, Mr. Speaker, between gender-neutral toilets and unisex toilets. We support unisex toilets, but toilets and bathrooms where men and women share the same space are the things that we are trying to get rid of with these new building regulations.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the Northern Ireland Assembly campaign, some female candidates were subjected to AI-utilised deepfake and grossly offensive content. What action is being taken by the government to regulate the dissemination of such imagery, where it could affect the otherwise freely expressed choice of voters at the ballot box, especially as we approach a general election in the coming months?
Mr. Speaker, the Online Safety Act did introduce new offences which criminalise the sharing or threatening to share an intimate image without consent, and that includes deepfake intimate images. The government is working to ensure we are ready to respond to the full range of threats to our democratic processes, including through the Defending Democracy Task Force. If deepfakes are discovered by users on social media, they should report them directly to the platform. In the case of elections, they should be reported directly to the Electoral Commission because it is already an electoral offence to make false statements of fact about the character or conduct of a candidate during an election.
Caroline Ansell.
Mr. Speaker, having endured an induced coma and 6 rounds of chemotherapy, 17-year-old Leonie Miller launched her new business at a Wayfinder Woman event last month. Would my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, join me in wishing Leonie every success and outline what support and advice is available so other young women see running their own business as a very real prospect?
I would like to wish Leonie every success, and my right honourable friend is right to raise this issue. In March, we proudly announced the launch of the Invest in Women Task Force. Its mission is to make the UK the best place in the world to be a female founder, and since its launch, the task force members have been working with the private sector to begin raising its fund for female founders, just like my honourable friend's constituent.
Sarah Green.
Speaker, both Baroness Cumberledge in the first Do No Harm report and the Patient Safety Commissioner in the Hughes report recommend a redress scheme for women harmed by surgical mesh. What conversations is the Minister having with government colleagues to make this redress scheme a reality for these women who are still suffering?
Well, it's this Conservative government that's commissioned the Patient Safety Commissioner to do a report on what redress would look like. It's really important that we take those recommendations in detail, and actually we are looking at that, and we aim to respond to the Patient Safety Commissioner in the coming weeks.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some sporting bodies have interpreted the Equality Act in such a way that they believe they cannot lawfully ban males who identify as girls and women for competing in women's sport. Does my right honourable friend agree that this interpretation is not correct and that it is lawful to exclude all males from female sport to achieve safety and fairness for women and girls?
Same State.
Mr. Speaker, I do agree. There is so much misinformation out there, incorrect guidance that is creating confusion. I recently had a roundtable with the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and she and I both agreed that this is an area which sports bodies in the UK need to tackle more strongly.
Right, that's... I'm not sure the Chief Whip is. Right, let us... We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Jonathan Lord.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jonathan Lord.
Residents across the eastern villages of Woking in Byfleet, West Byfleet and Purford have seen a large number of proposed developments over recent years. Of particular concern is an area of beautiful fields near West Hall, where over 1,000 of my constituents have written back to me in recent weeks expressing their deep concerns about the lack of provision of local infrastructure and the potential effects on the local environment. My residents and I will fight on, but does the Prime Minister agree with me that Labour's proposals to concrete over vast swathes of the Greenbelt in Surrey and the South East would be a complete calamity?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Unlike actually both the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party, who believe in top-down targets that would decimate the Greenbelt, we believe in local people having a say over their local communities, which is why we are making sure that we make best use of brownfield land and ensuring that we conserve and enhance our precious countryside for generations to come.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Prime Minister treated us to his 7th relaunch in 18 months. He vowed to take on the dangers that threaten the country. So it was good to see the Minister for Common Sense immediately take up that mantle by announcing a vital crackdown on the gravest of threats, colourful lanyards. Meanwhile, in the real world, after 14 years of Tory government, the prison system is in chaos. Does the Prime Minister think that his decision to let prisoners out 70 days early makes our country more secure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, civil service impartiality is an important principle that we're right to support, but perhaps he could ask his Chief of Staff about that. But actually on Monday, what I did do is outline the serious security threats that our country faces from an axis of authoritarian states. Russia poisoning people on our streets, China targeting our democracy, Iranian proxies firing on British ships, and yet he won't back our plan to increase defence spending. Now, we all know why, especially with the Deputy Leader and indeed the Shadow Foreign Secretary who voted to scrap our nuclear deterrent. It's clear that you simply can't trust Labour with our country's security.
Well, I appreciate he's been busy on the front line of the war against lanyards, but he must have missed this. I was the first to call for 2.5% on defence spending. The last time it happened was under the last Labour government, but it needs is a credible plan, not his fantasy economics. But I am disappointed to see that version 7.0 of his time in office doesn't extend as far as answering questions or giving any information on those prisoners he is releasing early. Basic details like how many, where are they, what crimes have they committed. So will he at least guarantee that none of the criminals he is instructing prisoners to release early are considered high risk?
Mr. Speaker, there are strict eligibility criteria in place with exclusions based on public safety, and no one would be put on the scheme if they were deemed a threat to public safety. But he talks about 2.5%, Mr. Speaker. So if he does think it is important, as I think he just actually stood up and acknowledged that it was the right thing to do, we've got a fully funded plan to actually deliver an increase in defence spending, and it's him and his party who have refused to match that commitment.
Just like his £46 billion fully funded. If anyone was looking for the perfect metaphor for this shambolic government, we saw it on Monday. The Prime Minister woke up deciding his latest rebrand was Mr. Security. But within hours, the Tory party was being investigated for accidentally publishing the personal details of hundreds of people. Mr. Speaker, he must be the only tech brother on the continent who can't work a debit card or send an email. But he's not answered my question, so I'll try it again. Are any of the prisoners he is currently letting out early considered to be high risk?
Mr. Speaker, he just showed spectacularly why he's just not fit to lead this country into the future. This country has a proud tradition of leading the world. We led the world when it came to the Industrial Revolution. But if he was around, he would have probably called James Watt the steam bro, Mr. Speaker. And what we're doing is preparing the country for the future. But when he talks about the prison scheme, let me be crystal clear. No one would be put on the scheme if they were deemed a threat to the public. Offenders are subject to the toughest of licensing conditions. And if those conditions are broken, they are back in prison for considerably longer. But what's his record on this? He voted against tougher sentences for violent criminals. He actually opposed new powers for the police to tackle violent crime, voted against new laws that have arrested 1,000 criminal people smugglers. The message is crystal clear. He can't be trusted to keep this country safe.
I appreciate that all this rebranding is taking all of his time, but he may want to read the recent inspection report into Lewis Prison. On this topic, I've asked him twice about. It documents, page 5, high-risk prisoners being released at short notice without sufficient planning. Page 46, a high-risk prisoner had his release date brought forward, despite a history of stalking, domestic abuse and a restraining order. Their words, he was a risk to children. Does the early release of stalkers, domestic abusers and those considered a risk to children sound like the work of someone who is making the country more secure?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, no one should be put on this scheme if they are a threat to the public. And let me be crystal clear, it does not apply. And let me be absolutely clear, it does not apply to anyone serving a life sentence, anyone convicted of a serious violent offence, anyone convicted of terrorism, anyone convicted of a sex offence. And crucially, in contrast to the system that Labour had put in place, Mr. Speaker, governors in the prison service have an absolute lock so that no one is put on the scheme who shouldn't be. But thankfully, Mr. Speaker, their scheme let out thousands upon thousands of violent offenders onto our streets, and even 2 terrorists. Thankfully, we've toughened up sentencing against those criminals with new legislation, but he voted against it, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I'm glad to hear that those on life sentences are being released early, and he may not think that releasing domestic abusers is a problem. But Labour has repeatedly called for domestic abusers to be exempt from his scheme to release prisoners early. His government has shamefully ignored those calls. So now we have the evidence that domestic abusers are being released early. The Lewis report, Prime Minister. Will he finally change course and back Labour's calls?
Mr. Speaker, as I've been crystal clear, there is an absolute governor lock on people who are put on the scheme. And in contrast to the last Labour scheme, prisoners were let out with no supervision, no electronic tags. In fact, 80,000 offenders were let out. 16,000 were violent, Mr. Speaker, leading to multiple murders committed. We fixed that system. But when it comes to this question, not only are we building the biggest prison programme in history, we're also deploying rapid deployment cells. And, Mr. Speaker, because on this side of the House, we understand the importance of prison. Unlike one of his frontbenchers who said, and I said, who, quote, prison doesn't prevent crime. It's always the same with the Labour Party, soft on crime and soft on criminals.
He's literally letting criminals out early. Mr. Speaker, the only answer to the question I asked, whether domestic abusers should be exempt from his early release scheme from anyone serious about security, is yes. Perhaps the most ludicrous part of the Prime Minister's speech on Monday was when he said he won't accept the idea that any of the problems people are facing are caused by the 14 years of Conservative government. He won't say how many prisoners they've released early. He won't say if they're burglars, abusers or stalkers. He won't say where they are or what support their victims are getting. Yet he thinks he has the right to tell people they can't blame his government for any of it. Doesn't he think that rather than confiscating lanyards like some jumped-up milk monitor, he should stop issuing get-out-of-jail cards free to prisoners considered a risk to children?
Mr. Speaker, another week with no ideas and absolutely no plan for the country. They've had 14 years to think about nothing but the future, but all they can do is talk about the past, Mr. Speaker. But I am surprised, because what he didn't bring up that has happened in the last week since we met is that statistics confirm that we have now had the joint fastest growth rate in the G7 this year, Mr. Speaker. The Bank of England said that the economy had turned a corner. EY said our growth was impressive. The chief economist of the Independent Office for National Statistics said the economy is going gangbusters, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Shadow Chancellor may want to copy and paste their comments into her next speech. Or does she think they're all gaslighting the British public too?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I understand the need to upgrade our broadband infrastructure, it cannot be right that a company called Brisk is proposing to erect telegraph poles in the Squirrels estate in Hayley Green in my constituency. So, would the Prime Minister agree with me that residents are 100% opposed to these proposals and they go against the guidance? So would the Prime Minister agree with me that they should abandon these proposals, that they should that we should have a review of permitted development rights in relation to this type of infrastructure, and he should give Ofcom greater power to investigate breaches?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for rightly championing the views of his constituents on this important topic. Network operators have to follow legal obligations when deploying their networks, and Ofcom can in fact investigate reports of failure to follow these obligations. And I know that the Minister for Digital Infrastructure has met the sector and Ofcom recently to raise concerns about reports of poor pole sighting, asked operators to share infrastructure, and I will ask her specifically to provide my honourable friend with a more detailed update.
Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Prime Minister outlined what he considers to be extremist threats to our society. And in doing so, he actively compared North Korea, Iran and Russia with those people in Scotland who believe in independence. So can I ask him to rise once to the standards befitting of his office and apologise for those puerile and pathetic remarks.
Mr. Speaker, that's not what I said, but I would say to the honourable gentleman that his party is indeed a threat to the integrity of the United Kingdom. And I hate to remind him, but that's literally their entire purpose, Mr. Speaker, because when the people of Scotland accepted the referendum in 2014, it was the SNP who didn't. They went on creating a Minister for Independence, focused on constitutional wrangling, ignoring the needs of the people. Education standards falling, taxes rising. So actually, finally, he should do the right thing and end the obsession with independence and put the needs of the Scottish people first.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. What the Prime Minister did was not just equate my colleagues and I to despotic and dangerous despots across the world. He proactively compared almost half of the Scottish population with a war criminal like Vladimir Putin. And he did so as their Prime Minister, as the man who represents them on the world stage and the man who on these aisles is tasked with defending their liberties and their democracy. Now, we know that his sorry time in office is rapidly coming to a conclusion. Is this really how he wants to be remembered?
Mr. Speaker, as ever, distracting from the actual record of what the SNP are doing in Scotland. And this obsession with independence means that Scottish schoolchildren are being let down, plummeting down international league tables. The Scottish NHS, the only place in the United Kingdom where funding is actually falling in real terms, and taxes going up for ordinary hard-working families and small businesses. That is what the SNP are doing in Scotland, while this UK government is delivering for them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Uxbridge College, who have recently entered into a pioneering partnership with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? This is groundbreaking work for the further education sector, and it's going to have great benefits for local businesses and local students, for the education sector and for the local economy.
Well, I join my honourable friend in congratulating Uxbridge College and the West London Institute of Technology for their collaboration with MIT. This is equipping students with the skills of the future and that local businesses require. And that's very much the story of this government, Mr. Speaker. The biggest long-term settlement for post-16 education in this country in years. A proud record of creating over 5.5 million apprenticeships since 2010, providing opportunity for all while the party opposite wants to halve the number of apprenticeships and put a brake on people's aspirations.
Roberts.
My party, Plaid Cymru, has secured a crucial win for our farmers as Labour in Wales are forced to pause the sustainable farming scheme. We've done our bit for farmers. Now it's time the Prime Minister did his. Harmful trade deals and Brexit checks are hitting our world-famous Welsh lamb and beef. Will he, therefore, guarantee to Welsh farmers that he will never again sign a deal that threatens their interests?
Well, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable lady cared about Welsh farmers, she should stop propping up the Welsh Labour government. And it was actually the work of the Welsh Conservatives that ensured that there was a spotlight on the Labour government's proposals in Wales, which would have led to thousands of job losses, less food security for our country, and destroyed rural incomes. Farmers rightly described it as bleak, damaging and shocking, just like the Labour Party's approach to rural Britain.
Mr. Speaker, Barnet Hospital A&E is expanding. Finchley Memorial Hospital has had its diagnostics hub boosted by new equipment, and there are more appointments in general practice locally than there were before the pandemic, but I still have constituents who are waiting too long for NHS care. So can I urge the Prime Minister to redouble his efforts to grow the NHS workforce and get waiting times down?
I'm delighted to hear about the new Community Diagnostic Centre in my honourable friend's local hospital, and we are working tirelessly to reduce the overall NH waiting list, which has come down by around 200,000 since September of last year, and that is an achievement in light of the pressures from industrial action. But she's right, there's more to do, which is why our productivity plan will free up clinicians to spend more time with patients, and, to her point, our long-term plan for the NHS will ensure that we train more doctors and more nurses to meet the workforce requirements the NHS has for the future.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 30,000 Palestinian deaths, not enough to move this Prime Minister to end arms sales to Israel. The killing of British aid workers, not enough to move the Prime Minister to end arms sales. It even seems that, unlike the US, an all-out assault on Rafah, with all the death and destruction that would entail, wouldn't be enough. So just what on earth would be enough to finally move this Prime Minister into the same position as the majority of the British public and end arms sales to Israel?
Mr. Speaker, I just point out to the honourable gentleman that the UK government does not directly sell arms to Israel, unlike the US, and nor does the UK government offer any military lethal aid packages to Israel, as the US does. So he should not conflate these issues. As part of the government's robust arms control regime, we do regularly review advice to ensure compliance with international law, and ministers act in accordance with that advice. Our position with regard to export licences, as he knows, is unchanged following the most recent assessment, and it is indeed in line with other partners, including the United States.
Done. As a member of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, I was delighted that the Prime Minister found time yesterday to ignite the light of liberation at the start of its journey to Normandy to commemorate sacrifices made for the liberation of Europe. Will my right honourable friend join me this War Graves week in confirming that standing up to tyrants who bring about war in Europe is as much in our national interest today as it was 80 years ago?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his work as a commissioner on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And he raises an important point about authoritarian states with different values to ours becoming increasingly assertive. So it is right that we build our security in uncertain times, defending and protecting our country, our values and our interests. That's why we've made the generational decision to increase our defence spending. And it's crystal clear that it's only the Conservative Party that can be trusted with our nation's security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 2nd of June, the Leavenmouth Railway reopens after years of community campaigning. But just at that point, TSB have announced that they are closing their Leven bank branch. Loss of banks hollow out communities, and they're an impediment to small businesses as well. Now, Cash Access UK have said that they're going to roll out 100 by the end of the year banking hubs, and FCA are consulting. But can the Prime Minister accept that the government has been too slow on this, and what else is he going to do to prevent these banking deserts from emerging?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said repeatedly from this dispatch box, it's imperative that banks and building societies recognise the needs of all customers, including those who still need to use in-person cash services, and that's why we legislated to protect access to cash as part of the Financial Services and Markets Act, and as a result, customers can access cash and banking services through a wide range of channels, including post offices, ATMs, telephone and other services, but including community initiatives like banking hubs.
Alberto Costa.
Double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork is yet again having another parole hearing in the next few weeks. As well as the brutal murders, this man exposed himself to over 1,000 girls and women. Now, as MP for South Leicestershire, I distributed a constituency-wide survey asking my constituents about parole board reform. Because the problem, Mr. Speaker, is that the reconsideration mechanism rules allow Mr. Pitchfork to keep asking for a reconsideration of a reconsidered decision, limitless times and cost-free to him. So, can I ask the Prime Minister if he will arrange a meeting between myself and the Justice Secretary to discuss necessary changes to the reconsideration mechanism rules, and will he arrange for me to be able to deliver the findings of the survey where thousands of constituents have responded to his number 10 policy team?
Can I commend my honourable friend, the member for South Leicestershire, for his tireless campaigning about this case? And I know that the whole House will join me in recognising the horror of the crimes committed by Colin Pitchfork and sending our condolences to the victims' families. Now, we are reforming the parole system to add a ministerial check on the release of the most dangerous criminals and changing the law so that society's most depraved killers' life means life. But I will, of course, arrange for the findings of my honourable friend's survey to be properly considered and will ensure that he meets with the Justice Secretary to discuss his proposals further.
Rosanna Allen-Carr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In Gaza, Israel has attacked hospitals, it's attacked refugee camps, and it has killed aid workers. Israel has blocked vital aid, turned off water supplies, and denied access to food. Israel has killed thousands upon thousands of innocent civilians as the world watches, trampling all over international humanitarian law. No other country would be allowed to act with such impunity. So, can the Prime Minister tell me why he allows Israel to get away with it unchallenged and why he continues to act as a bystander to such horror?
Well, Mr. Speaker, well, we do support, and I do support Israel's right to defend itself and remove the threat that Hamas, the terrorist organisation, poses to its people. But I am also deeply concerned about the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and have consistently made that point at this dispatch box and to Prime Minister Netanyahu. We must see further action to ensure more aid gets to people who desperately need it. The Rafah and the Kerem Shalom crossing must be open to allow more aid in. We're doing everything we can, trebling our investment, trying to get aid in by land, air and sea, and currently working with allies to build a temporary pier. But she can rest assured that we, on this side of the House, will continue to do everything we can to get support to the people in Gaza who need it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, along with apprentices from the nuclear fuel company Urenco, I visited Coleg Menai in Llangefni. The students were excited, but they need certainty about the future of Wilva before they commit to a career in nuclear. Can the Prime Minister confirm when Great British Nuclear will decide if Wilva will be a gigawatt or an SMR site, when my students can expect to see spades in the ground, and when can his brilliant nuclear minister visit Wilva again to announce some good news?
My honourable friend is a tireless campaigner for the Wilva nuclear site in her constituency. Now, she knows at the spring budget the Chancellor announced that Great British Nuclear has reached an agreement to purchase the site at Wilva, and these and one other site will be vital to achieving our aim of more energy security from nuclear power. Decisions haven't yet been made on the final site to be used, but as ever she makes a very strong and compelling case for her area, and as soon as a decision has been made, I know that the Energy Secretary is keen to update her at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In March, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's report into 1950s women's state pension injustice made clear to the government that the Department for Work and Pensions was guilty of maladministration, that these women suffered significant injustice, that they were owed compensation, and that Parliament must urgently identify a mechanism for redress. Nearly 279,000 of women have already died waiting for justice. So when will the Prime Minister finally place before this House a mechanism for appropriate redress?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said to the House last week, I understand the strong feelings across the Chamber about these matters and the desire for urgency in addressing them. And following the Ombudsman's multi-year investigation, it is imperative that we take the time to thoroughly review the findings, and I'm not entirely sure I agree with her characterisation of all of them so far. But broadly, we are committed to making sure that pensioners have the dignity and security they deserve, including through the triple lock, which is increasing pensions by £900 this year. But I welcome tomorrow's debate on the Ombudsman's report, and we will, of course, take all views into account as we identify and implement next steps.
Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, takes a personal interest in community pharmacy. Community pharmacists play an essential role in reducing pressure on urgent care services by helping people prevent ill health and managing long-term conditions. Pharmacy First is a good example of government commitment to community pharmacy. However, community pharmacy are under extreme financial pressure, and some are closing, including in St Ives. This year, 177 pharmacies have closed compared to 116 last year. Will my right honourable friend do everything he can to ensure funds are directed towards community pharmacy so that our pharmacy friends can help government to deliver NHS services where and when they are most needed?
Minister.
As my honourable friend knows, I do care deeply about the future of our community pharmacies. There are over 10.5 community pharmacies across the country working incredibly hard to serve their patients, and I'm pleased that around 80% of people live within a 20-minute walk of a pharmacy, and that's why we're backing them with Pharmacy First, with £645 million of extra funding, whereby people can now go and see their pharmacist rather than their GP to get treatments for the 7 most common ailments like ear infections and the like. And this will ensure that not only can they get treatments closer to home, Mr. Speaker, but it will help deliver our plan to cut waiting lists and get people the care they need more quickly.
Lyndon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 North Tyneside schools have been identified with a structural problem, not RAC, with hundreds of pupils now taught off-site. Costs of putting these schools right significantly outweigh the £3.5 million SCA fund for all of North Tyneside. Will the Prime Minister ensure the Department of Education applies the policy that, if it's alerted to significant issues with a building that cannot be managed with local resources, it will provide additional support on a case-by-case basis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising the case. As she knows, the Department for Education has provided extensive support and funding to all those schools that had RAC, which in the end was less than 1%, I think, of all schools that could have been affected. And more generally, given the very significant amounts we're investing in school rebuilding and maintenance, I'm sure that the Education Secretary would have heard her concerns and will write to her in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The clear message from yesterday's Farm to Fork Summit is that food security matters. So as we await today's written statement on ground-mounted solar, can my right honourable friend assure me that the thousands of acres of agricultural land proposed for solar installation in my constituency, from a 2,100-acre installation in the Claydons called Rosefield to smaller but equally destructive ones such as near the village of Kimblewick, now have less chance of getting approved?
Honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this, and particularly at a time of increasing geopolitical risk, we must protect this nation's food security and therefore our most valuable agricultural land. Now, we can achieve our solar deployment targets and do that on brownfield sites, rooftops and away from our best farmland. I know he'll look forward to the Energy Secretary's statement later today, which will ensure that we do avoid using our best agricultural land, because like him, I agree that we should be backing British farmers to produce more food. That's good for our country, good for our economy and good for our food security.
Ellen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've seen for myself the mouldy and damp accommodation that our military families are sometimes forced to live in. So I was disappointed this week to find out that the officer in charge of accommodation wrote to families this month to say that requests for non-urgent repairs are not currently affordable. The Prime Minister has spent this week claiming that defence is a priority. So when is he going to prioritise a safe, warm and decent home for the servicemen and women who put their lives on the line for us?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're committed to ensuring that our armed forces personnel and their families have safe and well-maintained accommodation. At this point, 96% of service family accommodation meets or exceeds the government's decent home standards, and last year we put aside an extra £400 million investment to improve things. And when issues are reported, the Ministry of Defence has set up a dedicated hotline to ensure that those complaints are investigated by a professional surveyor, and I know that there have been several improvements made specifically to the accommodation in her area. But again, we are able to continue backing our armed forces personnel and for the job that they do for us, because we are the only party in this place committed to increasing our defence spending.
Mr. Speaker, this week the all-party parliamentary group on birth trauma published our first report called Listen to Mums, Ending the Postcode Lottery on Perinatal Health. This was the first national inquiry by cross-party politicians on this issue, and we received more than 1,300 testimonials from the public. So can I thank the Health Secretary first for attending our report launch on Monday, and I'm delighted she's agreed to our headline recommendation for a national comprehensive maternity strategy to be published by NHS England. So can I ask the Prime Minister to fully back our report and implement all of our recommendations to ensure that all mothers in this country get the aftercare that they deserve?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Member for Stafford for her incredible campaigning on this issue. When we met and discussed, she presented me personally with a copy of this important report, and I'm hugely grateful to her and the APPG on birth trauma for carefully considering the report, and indeed all those brave women who have come forward to share their stories. I'm delighted that the Secretary of State and the NHS CEO both support the overarching recommendation for a comprehensive national strategy to improve maternity services. We will update the House on next steps in due course, but we are fully committed to improving the quality and consistency of care for women throughout pregnancy, birth and the critical months that follow.
Final question, in other words.
Mr. Speaker, when adult rape cases are taking 2 years on average to complete, it's no wonder that 62% of all rape survivors now drop out of the process. When just 2.5% of rapes recorded last year have resulted in a charge, and fewer still will end in conviction, it's no wonder that the Victims Commissioner, Rape Crisis and others have argued that rape has been effectively decriminalised in this country. Is the Prime Minister not ashamed that because of his government's failings, victims and survivors are being put through a living hell in our criminal justice system?
Well, Mr. Speaker, while it's right that the Honourable Lady raises this incredibly important topic, I completely disagree with her characterisation of how this government has treated it. It's actually this government previously that introduced the Rape Review Action Plan, which is now showing significant improvements to how we treat rape end to end through the criminal justice system. Violence against women and girls is now a strategic policing requirement for the first ever time. We've rolled out Operation Sorteria so that police forces have the expertise that they need. We've actually quadrupled funding for victim support with more independent domestic sexual violence offender advisors. There's a new 24/7 support for victims. We've ended the digital strip search, provided pre-trial cross-examination, all of which, by the way, has meant an improvement in the process. And we have seen an increase in the average sentence to rape by 1/3 since Labour were last in office. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, we did that using a power that her party voted against.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We now come to the urgent question. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Defence if he will make a statement on Russia's aggression relating to Ukraine and the situation in Georgia. Thank you.
Speaker, we are on day 811 of Putin's so-called special military operation, an operation that was supposed to last for 3 days, and he has failed in all of his objectives. But of course the conflict is evolving and challenging. Russia's newly formed northern grouping of forces have attacked into Ukraine's Kharkiv region, taking control of several villages. By opening up an additional attack, an axis of attack, Russia is almost certainly attempting to divert Ukrainian resources away from other parts of the front line and to threaten Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, we will not be diverted from our commitment to provide Ukraine with the support they need to prevail. because, Mr. Speaker, Ukraine will prevail. In April, the Prime Minister announced our largest ever and most comprehensive package of equipment from the United Kingdom, including long-range strike, air defence, artillery, reconnaissance, protected mobility, development of Ukraine's navy and airfield enablement, and munitions to support the introduction of the F-16. The Prime Minister also announced £500 million of additional funding, which takes us to £3 billion annually in the UK military aid for Ukraine this financial year. We continue to work with international allies and partners to cohere and coordinate our support to Ukraine, including through the international capability coalitions, where we co-lead the maritime and drone coalitions. We recently announced a complete package of £325 million for cutting-edge drones. This will deliver more than 10,000 drones for the Ukrainian armed forces. In March, we were pleased to congratulate the first 10 Ukrainian pilots to complete their basic flying training in the United Kingdom. These trainees join more than 65,000 Ukrainians who have received training in the UK since 2014, including over 39,000 recruits since 2022 through Operation Interflex. Turning to Georgia, Mr. Speaker, we continue to observe with concern the events in Tbilisi, including yesterday's violent clashes in and around the Georgian Parliament and the intimidation of peaceful protesters. The United Kingdom, along with our partners, is of course committed to the right of peaceful protest, and we are concerned by the introduction of the law on transparency of foreign influence. The UK is a close friend to Georgia, and as such, we call for calm and restraint on all sides. We hope to continue to work with Georgia, with whom we have a deep and long-standing partnership, and to support the legitimate aspirations of the Georgian people as they pursue a free, sovereign and democratic future.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank you for granting the UQ? We much appreciate it, and on this it's very important. Can I thank the Minister for his very helpful response, and for other members who, right honourable members who have stayed behind. Having woke up to reports of Ukraine attempting to push back in the Kharkiv region, only to find the Russian Defence Ministry has claimed its air forces have destroyed 10 long-range missiles known as ATACMS that Ukraine's military launched overnight at Crimea. The media reporting may have settled down, but the situation over there is as volatile as it has ever been, and the rippling effect in this entire region is continuing. At a time when Blinken from President Biden's administration visits Ukraine to give physical and military assistance to Ukraine and encouragement, the Minister will understand that Georgia is pushing forward legislation as Russia tries to restore its empire of old and control all of its former satellite states. The Russian threat is clearly undermining the democratic process of this entire region. And whilst I understand and agree with the UK's clear and public stance of support for Ukraine, and I congratulate the Government and the Minister on what has been done and what will be done in the future, the current situation does, I believe, demand further action. And I'm very keen to get the Minister's response on what that further action will be. I'd ask the Minister to make clear what further enhanced help we can give to facilitate the democratic process, as well as the vital military aid necessary in this region. The war, which began in 2022, is on the precipice, and I am asking how we can ensure that the result is a victory for democracy, for freedom, for liberty, not simply for Ukraine, but also for Georgia and for all of us globally. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Very grateful to the honourable gentleman for asking this question. It's an extremely good and valid question, because he sets the question of Ukraine within the regional context of the influence that Russia has sought to exert over its former satellite states. He's right to point out, Mr. Speaker, that the front line in Ukraine is turbulent. A full picture is yet to emerge. But what we can be certain of, Mr. Speaker, is our continued resolve to ensure that our Ukrainian friends prevail. The ongoing visit of Secretary Blinken, I think, reminds us of the remarkable heft and scale of Western support, of which we play our part very proudly. And I think that is the unavoidable direction of travel, that the resolute support of the friends of Ukraine will help it prevail despite turbulence and despite the attempts of Russia to create a new dynamic on what is a very turbulent front line. He asked some very cogent questions about Georgia. And he's right to point out that Georgia knows more than any other country about the deprivations of a Russian invasion following the horrifying events of 2008. We are very clear, Mr. Speaker, that Georgia has the sovereign right to pursue its own autonomous and sovereign path. If it seeks to turn its eyes to the West towards NATO membership and to maybe membership of the European Union, that is the sovereign right of Georgia to forge that own destiny. We will continue to cooperate in earnest and sincere partnership with the Georgians, with whom we have a very meaningful defence relationship. I've had the pleasure of visiting Tbilisi twice as a Foreign Office Minister and seeing the tremendous institutional work we do with the Georgians, who have a fine defence tradition.
Chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the government share my view that just as Soviet failure in Afghanistan led considerably towards the downfall of the Soviet Empire, Putin's failure in Ukraine could have a similar effect on his future and his ambitions? And is it any coincidence at all that this renewed Russian attack is taking place before the aid which America has belatedly decided to give to Ukraine has a chance to arrive?
Minister. So to my right honourable friend's question is yes. One can see the extraordinary mobilisation of Russian state and society and the huge expenditure that Putin was having to make to maintain momentum in his failed military operation as confirmation, actually, of long-term weakness.
We now come to Shadow Minister Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for securing this urgent question. It's now 811 days since Putin began the full-scale illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russia has opened a renewed offensive in the Kharkiv region, but Ukrainians are continuing to fight with huge courage. The UK is totally united in support of Ukraine. The Shadow Defence Secretary and Shadow Foreign Secretary were in Kyiv for the last 2 days and reaffirmed that Labour's commitment to Ukraine is ironclad. If Putin wins, he will not stop at Ukraine. That is why the government have had and will continue to have Labour's fullest support for military aid to Ukraine and for reinforcing NATO's allies across Eastern Europe. Every commitment the UK military aid since Putin invaded has had Labour's fullest support, and that will continue. With a general election later this year, there may be a change to Labour, but there will be no change to Britain's resolve in standing with Ukraine, confronting Russian aggression and pursuing Putin for his war crimes. On Georgia, we're deeply concerned by the increased pressure on civil society freedoms and intimidation of protesters. The proposed draft law is not in line with the democratic values and risks taking Georgia away from the Euro-Atlantic aspirations of the Georgian people. What discussions has the Minister had with the US, the EU and other regional partners on the latest developments in Georgia? Is the UK putting Georgia on the agenda for the G7 meeting in Italy and the upcoming EPC? What steps is he taking with our allies to counter Russian disinformation and hybrid activities in Georgia and across the Caucasus, Western Balkans and the rest of Europe? And on Ukraine, can I ask, what support is being given to help Ukraine build up their air defences to stop air and drone strikes on critical infrastructure, especially in the Kharkiv region? And how much of the money has been committed to the International Fund for Ukraine has been spent, and how much is left to be spent? Mr. Speaker, the UK will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes for them to win.
I'm glad that he pointed out the remarkable courage of our Ukrainian friends in terms of their efforts to counter the new axis of advance in the Kharkiv region. And we sincerely welcome the continued cross-party support of our support to Ukraine. He expressed the concern that we do share about the new law passed in Georgia, and it is on the agenda of our discussions with allies. I can't comment, it's beyond my scope, Mr. Speaker, to comment on what might be on the agenda for the G7 or the EPC, but it is certainly an issue of concern that we do discuss with trusted partners and have done very frequently recently. A huge amount of institutional effort is going into countering disinformation from our side across the entire region, and as well as the Western Balkans and Central Asia, the former so-called satellite states of Russia that have a particular vulnerability to disinformation from the Kremlin. And I won't go into details about that effort, but that is that's a significant piece of work, Mr. Speaker, which will continue to be extremely important. He asked a good question about air defence. Of course, we have gifted thousands of units of air defence to Ukraine. There will surely be more to come, and the uplift in finance, in financial support that we have announced, clearly that will be an issue for the Ukrainians and through our gifting programme, but air defence will feature largely in that.
Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this really important, urgent question. On Georgia, the brutalisation of peaceful, ordinary Georgians and hospitalisation of opposition leader David Katsarava is utterly shameful. So can the Minister please assure us that he will protest directly to the Georgian government and call on the ambassador regarding the abuses of the public that we are seeing on our screens daily? On Ukraine, the fall of a deepfake at the start of this year was a shameful result of Allied inaction to get Ukraine what it needed. That falls on us. We cannot now see the same take place in Kharkiv, which is under assault for exactly the reasons set out already in this discussion. So can the Minister please assure us that sufficient ammunition is reaching the front line now, and also update us on what we are doing to procure sufficient artillery shells, because Ukraine, as ever, needs us to give them enough to win and not just to survive.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. We, of course, expressed our concerns about the direction of travel with regard to protests in Georgia, and the Foreign Office, I know, has made those representations to the ambassador here and will continue to keep a watching brief on that issue. She asked about Kharkiv. Of course, ammunition supplies is a central component of our efforts, both politically and in terms of what we are gifting and sourcing. We've given over 300,000 units of ammunition, but we acknowledge that we must all, in the Western and Friendly Nations Coalition, we must all mobilise to a far greater degree. That's why we think initiatives coming from the Czech side and across all European and NATO partners are important, and we must strain every sinew to ensure that the flow continues.
Person Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of cross-party support, that's shared on these benches as well. And let me also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, for gaining the UQ. I wonder, in terms of what we can additionally do for Ukraine following the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, does the Minister agree it's now time for the UK to join with other NATO allies in supporting the Chechnya munitions programme on top of what's already been provided? And in terms of Georgia, the government states that its aim is to advance Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration and security cooperation and support for democratic reforms. Can the Minister advise the House, given the Dream Party's lurch away from democratic reform, how stable is this integration and security cooperation? And does the Minister agree with me that it's time for the people of Georgia to have their say on the Dream Party's agenda?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his questions. We have not joined the Czech programme because it would replicate work we are already doing, but we commend its activities and we see it as part of a broader solution to mobilising effort to increase the flow of munitions. So it is welcome. On the political future of Georgia, clearly that is a question for the Georgians themselves. But what we do note is that there is a very lively debate, which is of course spilled out onto the streets of Tbilisi, about the direction of travel. And I agree with the honourable gentleman that those dictating the direction of travel, whether it be in the Euro-Atlantic direction or anything else, should be a function of the democratic expression of the people of Georgia.
Atherton.
I applaud the number of personnel trained under Op Interflex, but does the Minister support my call to further extend Op Interflex to train Ukrainian female defender volunteers?
Mr. Speaker, yes, of course, we will train whoever the Ukrainians send us.
So, Chris Brown.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. I warned in 2014 that if we kept on feeding the crocodile, the danger was that we would be the last on the menu, which is why it's so important that we get these next steps right over the next 2 years in relation to making sure that Putin doesn't win in Ukraine. Two things still perplex me. One is, why have we and our allies not dramatically ramped up the production of the artillery that Ukraine actually needs as a united team? And secondly, why have we yet to seize Russian state assets sitting in British and European banks and repurpose them for reparations to pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, we are ramping up the production of artillery right across European and states beyond Europe. That is a complex effort involving the military industrial base, but those steps are in place, and we are seeing, I'm confident we will see an increase in supply. He asked about state assets. Of course, we want that to be the outcome, but the route must be legal.
Francois. We in Britain, relative to the size of our army, have given more military equipment to Ukraine than anyone. We've now given them all of our heavy artillery to help them fight. Kharkiv cannot be allowed to fall. But let's be honest, all the kit the Ukrainians need to have already won this war has been sitting in American storage depots for 2 years, from F-16s to long-range missiles. When are we going to get it through to the occupant of the White House that if he carries on dithering and the Russians take Kharkiv, not only do the Ukrainians lose, he loses too, literally?
Right honourable friend makes a very pertinent and correct point. Of course, we led as hard as we could in the aftermath of the invasion and led the way with the critical provision of systems such as NLAW. And of course, historians will reflect on whether or not the months following the invasion were an opportunity missed to give a decisive advantage to our Ukrainian friends. But our focus now is on ensuring that in the round and overwhelmingly the combined effect of the huge package from the United States now, as well as ours and all friendly nations, can ensure that they will maintain the defence and ultimately the liberation of their sovereign homeland.
Jamie Stone. Speaker, some time ago I asked the Prime Minister about a relationship with Turkey. Now, we might have some issues with Turkey, but the fact remains that geographically, next door to Georgia, its strategic position is crucial. Furthermore, Turkey has very important links with many of the players in this deeply dangerous situation. So can I ask, what conversations is the Foreign Office having with Ankara about resolving this situation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I can answer on behalf of my cross-departmental colleagues. I'm thinking many conversations, and we recognise the centrality of Turkey's importance as a strong NATO ally and a nation with tremendous military confidence, which has also made a remarkable contribution to the defence of Ukraine's sovereignty by the provision of the remarkable Bayraktar weapon system.
Mark Pritchard.
Speaker, on Georgia, can I welcome the Minister saying the UK government wants to continue to work with Georgia, and that's quite right. But is he aware of the comments of the senior US State Department official, Jim O'Brien, who yesterday said that the relationship to the US and Georgia could be reviewed, could be at risk, and possibly restrictions, financial and travel, could be imposed? But is it not the case? All of that can be avoided if the Georgian government drop this foreign agents law, or at least significantly amend it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is right, and he speaks with authority, and he is right in his analysis. Of course, we note the US view, and we have expressed our concerns. And what we will continue to do is use our strong relationship with the Georgians to ensure that they amend, for their own interest, their behaviour.
Alex Serber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Leeds sits the city as Kharkiv. The people of Leeds are gravely concerned that the invasion of Kharkiv is imminent. Colleagues have already asked about artillery shells in short supply, but even bullets are in short supply? What is the UK doing to supply the Ukraine defence of Kharkiv with bullets? Also, are we upscaling humanitarian aid to Kharkiv and utilising that for evacuation of civilians who want to leave? And will the UK government supply additional visas for Kharkivians who want to come to the UK because the people of Leeds are ready to welcome them into their homes?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the question from the member for Leeds, the sister city, I now realise, which is interesting. What we're doing is putting more money than ever before into our support to lethal aid for Ukraine, an additional £500 million, which will take our support this year to £3 billion. A lot of that will go on munitions, but of course humanitarian is also significant, and that is an important part of the picture.
Speaker, like any bully, Russia will advance if they feel that the West is not supporting Ukraine. And they've seen that we've not been supporting it enough in the West because of the lack of ammunition that's been going on. The shortage of ammunition for any soldier in the field, as the Minister is fully aware, is crucial to the confidence and the morale. So can we have a biggest push we possibly can that what the Americans have said is actually in the front line. I saw this morning that they said some of the ammunition has already arrived. Has it already arrived? And what is the timetable for the rest? Because it's completely unfair on the armed forces out there.
Well, Mr. Speaker, his analogy of my right honourable friend's analogy of Russia as a bully is absolutely correct. We are focused on increasing ammunition supplies, and my judgment is that the £61 billion package from the US side, combined with our additional support, will result in tangible improvement in terms of the operational situation on the front line.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, Georgia, alongside Ukraine, aspire to join NATO. Does the Minister therefore agree it's really important that Georgia respect peaceful protest? And regarding Ukraine, with the Russians closing in an artillery range with Kharkiv, what military delivery of support can we deliver now to prevent Russia from being able to bombard the city of Kharkiv, which would be catastrophic for the civilian population?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with his analysis with regard to Georgia's NATO aspirations. That is clear. And the support we can give now is to continue our remarkable supply of lethal aid, and particularly with regards to air defence. Ben Birch.
What Putin is doing in Georgia now is exactly the same as he tried to do in Ukraine 10 years ago. Yet the British government, unlike the American government, doesn't seem to be thinking of any recalibration at all with the current Georgian regime, which is beating up its own citizens in the streets of Tbilisi. I mean, why hasn't he at least summoned the Georgian ambassador in London? What action has he taken, rather than just words, to make our views completely clear to the current Georgian government that their behaviour and this legislation is unacceptable?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in truth, those are questions for my colleagues in the Foreign Department. But our analysis is that the strong relationship we have with the Georgians in the defence sector is an important means of ensuring that their direction of travel is a positive one.
There's growing concern across Central and Northern Europe about the issue in Georgia. Will he have conversations with his own colleagues in government to ensure that our partners across Europe, that their commitment to NATO is increased to prepare for the undoubted expansionism that Putin is engaged in currently and is probably going to step up in the coming months?
Speaker, the answer is yes, and of course he will observe, like I do, that actually the consequence of Putin's effort to demonstrate NATO's weakness has been exactly the opposite. NATO is now larger and stronger than it was before February 2022. And we will lead the way in ensuring that all members meet the investment required to be a member of that tremendous defensive alliance.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate my honourable friend in securing this urgent question. The United Kingdom has led the world in supporting Ukraine militarily, economically, diplomatically and politically. And as a former sanctions minister, I saw the real impact that the United Kingdom could do with its partners working together on this. However, there is a real loophole with regard to the international strategy in cutting off Putin's finances. The United Nations peacekeeping force, for which we are a member, currently procures its military helicopters from Russia. And therefore that money goes back into Putin's pockets. Can I ask the Minister, was he or the government aware of this? Now that they are, will the government raise this at the G7 to urgently ensure we cut off Putin's finances?
Well, I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, for my honourable friend raising that, and I will ensure my colleague, the Sanctions Minister, takes that into account. Very agree,
Mr. Speaker, we are united in our determination to support Ukraine as it seeks to defeat Putin. Labour welcomed the creation of a new UK-Latvian drone capability coalition earlier this year and the UK commitment to spend £200 million on drones for Ukraine. Can the Minister confirm when the first drones under that initiative will be delivered to Ukrainian forces?
Very soon.
Mr. Speaker, as chair of the Georgia All-Party Group, I have watched the demonstrations in Tbilisi with no little concern. Whilst I have noticed no new movement of Georgia towards Russia culturally, economically or militarily, as some have been suggesting, it would appear that the current Georgian Dream government are becoming more ready to use the apparatus of the state, sometimes with violence, to suppress political dissent, free speech and the media. So will my right honourable friend impress on his Georgian counterpart, as an ally and as a friend, that this is not how democratic countries behave if they wish to join Western institutions and participate as a free democratic values country?
Well, my honourable friend is correct. Georgia must live up to the standard required if it's to be sincere about its democratic aspirations, and we do make that point to our friends in Georgia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're all rightly proud of the skills of our armed forces personnel and the training that they're providing through Operation Interflex for Ukrainians. But that, I understand, is only designated up until this summer. So can the Minister now confirm that that programme will continue for as long as it's needed?
Wholeheartedly, Mr. Speaker, our commitment to training our Ukrainian allies is enduring. And of course, we will always respond to the type and form of training that they themselves require.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The events in the United States and the understandable focus on the conflict in Gaza and the unacceptable loss of life there have led some to argue that our support for Ukraine is wavering. Would the Minister seek to put a stop to that deliberate disinformation by setting out that our support for Ukraine is absolute, that we stand in solidarity with them in their fight against Putin's illegal aggression, that their battle is indeed, that they are battling in some respects on our behalf, because Putin's aggression, as we see, will not stop with the Ukraine? And would he, given that, will he set out how we are going to ensure that the ammunition that is so desperately needed gets to the front line as quickly as possible?
Speaker, I welcome that question, and by any measure, our commitment to Ukraine is significant and unwavering. And of course, recently that was expressed by the increase in our annual support from £2.5 billion worth of lethal aid to £3 billion worth, and by the 100-year defensive alliance signed by the Prime Minister with President Zelensky on his recent visit to Kyiv.
Thank you. I would like to thank my colleague and friend for securing this urgent question, and in doing so, Minister, I want to ask, what help and support are we as a nation given to those countries in Eastern Europe that feel under threat, such as Estonia, from the potential threat of Putin wanting to expand back into what was former Russian territory?
Speaker, that's a very good question, and the support we are giving is welcoming them as brothers, brother countries, brother and sister countries into the NATO, the defensive NATO alliance. And of course, in our case, we are very proud to have our enhanced forward presence battle group in Tallinn and Estonia. And of course, any members who, like me, have visited that battle group know that there's a tremendous esprit de corps which generated by the tremendous joint defensive work carried out by our British soldiers alongside their Estonian allies.
Right, presentation of bills, Barry Sherman. Not here. Oh, hello, Barry.
Yes, here.
Delivery Services Driving Licence Requirements Bill.
Right. Second reading what day?
God willing, Friday the 21st of June, Mr. Speaker.
With God willing, Friday the 21st of June. Thank you. Point of order, Mike Penny.
Mr. Speaker, I've been it's been my honour to be the MP for Hemel Hempstead for the last 19 years. And whenever I've had the opportunity, I've always tried to raise and honour the name of Captain Lawrence Nyrek, George Cross, who was my captain in the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, who was lost or captured, whatever way we want to describe it, last night, tortured, and we don't actually know, murdered today. It is right and proper that this House acknowledges, I think, the work that our armed forces do, particularly on Op Banner, but actually to actually recognise that Captain Nyrek was a different sort of officer. I think we'd all accept that. In many ways. For instance, he broke my nose for the first time in the boxing ring, sparring, I must admit. But also left 6 pints of Guinness on the naffy bar for me at the end of the evening because I gave him a good dig back. But that was what he was about. He was in the armed forces and he was in Northern Ireland because he wanted to make a difference for the people of Northern Ireland. And that's something this House should respect.
Now, first of all, say I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for informing me that he would raise this matter, as he knows it's not a point of order for the Chair, but the House will understand why he wanted to put the point on record, and he has done so eloquently, as he has done in previous years. Richard Graham.
Could I thank the Right Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead, who has almost every year visited the Church of St Mary de Lode in Gloucester in order to pay tribute and commemorate the work done by Captain Nyrek, GC, whose memory is also celebrated there by a stained glass window in his honour. And I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for continuing to raise this year after year.
Once again, that's also not a point of order, but it's certainly on the record. Right. Pauline Layton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to provide for a power to require a person to grant access to their digital devices in the course of a lawful inspection under the Customs and Excise Management Act 1979, where there's a reasonable suspicion that the device may contain child sexual abuse material, to provide that refusal to grant such access constitutes an offence and for connected purposes. I want to begin by outlining the scale of the problem this bill seeks to tackle. Up to 835,000 individuals in the United Kingdom represent a sexual risk to children, according to the National Strategic Assessment. We also know 85% of online offenders are hands-on abusers too. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually assaulted before the age of 18. Child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, is abundant online, so much so that there are almost 30 million unique CSAM files known to UK law enforcement, and the number is growing all the time. The digital age has brought with it tremendous opportunities for advancement in many areas. Communication has never been easier, and the world has never been smaller. But as the world has become smaller, criminal networks have grown larger. Law enforcement is still having to play catch-up, and as a result, tragically, unforgivably, more and more children are becoming victims to sexual predators. Mr. Speaker, the UK Border Force is our first line of defence against people travelling with intent to cause harm, whatever that may be. Their search powers have been sufficient to stop terrorists and drug smugglers, but they're not sufficient to stop child abusers. That's because the law governing the scope of their search powers was drafted in the 1970s. long before a digital age. A single photo taken from one of today's smartphones could easily exceed the entire capacity of even the highest spec 1970s floppy disk, then at the revolutionary cutting edge of computing. It was not an era when it was even conceivable that sexual predators would be travelling across borders with potentially thousands of illegal photos and videos in the palm of their hand. So the outdated law in question is the Customs and Excise Management Act 1979. It grants the power for a Border Force agent to search an individual and their baggage to detect the import or export of prohibited goods. Border Force does not require reasonable grounds to suspect the individual is in possession of prohibited goods to utilise this power in search in a port environment. Whilst existing powers permit Border Force to require an individual to present their baggage, including their digital devices, these powers do not extend to being able to require a person to open this baggage, i.e. unlock it. If they refuse to do so when asked, there's nothing the Border Force can do. In previous decades, CSAM would amount to a stack of Polaroids, which are often unmistakable and readily detectable. Now, all this material is carried digitally and often beyond encryption software and postcodes. To expand on this point, there have been several examples of lone individuals identified as being in possession of belongings associated with the commission of sexual offences against children. For example, toys, lubricants, condoms, and children's underwear. In these circumstances, where it's reasonable to suspect that the individual may be in possession of digital CSAM, Border Force cannot inspect the digital device unless the individual consents. Each time this happens, we could be letting in a dangerous abuser into the United Kingdom undetected. As I mentioned in my Westminster Hall debate on the same subject late last year, even when notified, it can take weeks for the police to trace an individual. There have been cases where a suspect has raped 2 or more young girls before being caught. Mr. Speaker, my bill gives Border Force the power it needs to prevent this. Under it, an individual refusing to unlock their digital devices will be subject to arrest for a new offence of obstruction. An international passenger of any nationality arrives or departs from the UK, the Border Force reasonably suspects the individual to be involved in a child sexual abuse. They are asked to unlock their digital device so the Border Force officers can perform a scan to determine beyond any reasonable doubt the presence of CSAM as verified by the Home Office's database. If they comply, the scan then takes place, and if content is detected, the individual is arrested under the 1979 Act. If they refuse, they commit an offence, and their devices are seized and forensically examined by the police or the National Crime Agency. And I want to go into a little more detail about the technology which is available now and how it will be used, because I know there may be some honourable members concerned about privacy. The power to search a device will be governed by a standard operating procedure which would ensure a device inspection was undertaken via a scan, not a download, which only searches a device's memory for a file, code or hashtag associated with known CSAM files. These codes are held on a Home Office database, which, as I said earlier, contains nearly 30 million unique files. There will be no manual device inspection or collateral searches. It also means the Border Force officers wouldn't have to be subjected to any horrific material themselves, as they would likely have been in previous decades. It's worth noting that a similar power already exists for the police in relation to terrorism material under Schedule 7 of the Terrorist Act 2000. Mr. Speaker, with these new powers, Border Force will become a full part of the multi-agency response needed to help prevent the proliferation of CSAM online. It also means they'll be able to meet recommendations by the Independent Inquiry on Child Sexual Abuse to increase proactive detection of previously unidentified persons and therefore safeguard children from new or further harm. Earlier, I mentioned that over 800,000 people in the UK present a sexual risk to children. What I did not say was very few of these individuals have been identified. With the new powers outlined, Border Force will go from having a near zero impact on locating offenders to playing an active role in preventing the sexual abuse of children. Further, it will also be able to prevent potential first-generation CSAM from making it onto the internet. Detection at the border can then be a starting point for further investigation, identifying other devices, items held at the suspect's home, or looking into other offences against New Zealand. As it is in New Zealand, a member of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Group, which brought in similar powers for the Border Force under 2018 Customs Act, they report a near 100% increase in intelligence-led interdictions against travelling child sex offences since the law was passed. Mr. Speaker, I'll conclude. For many years, I've campaigned against all forms of child abuse. Last year, in February last year, the Marriage and Civil Partnership Minimum Age Act 2022, which I sponsored, came into force. It means it's legal under any circumstances for a child under 18 to be married. Mr. Speaker, we brought an end to this form of abuse, but it's wrong that we still have laws which are so outdated that they allow sexual predators and abusers to escape justice, that we must expend serious parliamentary time and resources to enact what I believe is a simple and inarguable case is also a great frustration. Passing this bill would give the UK Border Force the ability to play an active role in identifying previously unknown individuals who might represent a danger to children. In doing so, we will be further protecting our children from the lifelong trauma which so often results from being the victim of sexual abuse. Child abuse is happening now, and these powers should be there to confront it. Thank you.
Hang on. Polly, come back. No. That the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that honourable members have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill? No.
Cheryl Murray, Ian Little-Granger, Heather Wheeler, Martin Vickers and myself, Mr. Speaker.
Pauline Latham.
Child Sexual Abuse Material Digital Devices Bill.
Second reading what then?
Friday the 21st of June.
Friday the 21st of June. Thanks, Paul.
Programme motion, Minister to move. The question is that the Criminal Justice Bill Programming number 3 motion as on the order paper. Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is an honour to open this debate and to bring the Criminal Justice Bill back to the House for discussion at report stage. This is an important piece of legislation focused on countering...
This is the programme motion. Does the Minister wish to speak to the programme motion?
No.
We've done that bit. Does anybody else wish to speak to the programme motion? Yes. Hi, go on.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the programme motion that was tabled yesterday afternoon, shortly before the rise of House, relating to the consideration of hundreds of amendments and new clauses to what is a serious and substantial bill. These relate to some of the most fundamental issues affecting our constituents. Today there is a debate on amendments and new clauses covering domestic abuse, to human trafficking, to transfers of prisoners to foreign prisons. Yet the House was only aware that this was the case yesterday evening. I am sure that members from across this House will have been up late trying their best to prepare as I was, but my duty to my constituents compels me to place on record my shock and worry about what this means, not only in terms of parliamentary democracy, but the quality of legislation that will actually be passed. Last week, there was an absurd situation where there was a deadline for the tabling of amendments and new clauses for a debate that we did not know what the business of which it would cover. And then I come to the 134 government amendments from my last count, tabled virtually at the last minute. These are not unsubstantial or merely technical, but include measures relating to new offences which would have potentially significant and wide-reaching consequences for our civil liberties and could even result in imprisonment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these amendments literally include things like further powers to the police to exercise without accountability. And I'm sure I don't need to remind this House that many of our constituents are very worried at the powers that the police already have and how they use them. It's no secret that trust in the police, particularly amongst women, survivors and people from diverse backgrounds, is already very low. And whatever the different views are across the House, surely there is consensus that measures of such significance, measures that could have very severe, potentially life-changing consequences for our constituents, should not be passed without appropriate scrutiny and without many of us even knowing of their existence. Certainly there has been very little public awareness or debate accordingly. Now, as members of Parliament, we have a profound duty to those who elect us regarding the scrutiny of legislation. It's not only about having a functioning democracy, but having workable and functioning laws. There are many questions about impact assessments and disabilities and equalities implications about which we do not know the full implications. For example, Government New Clause 96 prohibits wearing or otherwise using an item for the purpose of concealing identity in a locality designated by the police. And before even getting to a fundamental assessment of this measure as a whole, there are many questions and points of clarity that I know that my constituents would want at the very least to be publicly established. Just to raise one such question, how will this impact Muslim women who wear the hijab or the niqab? Because the phrasing of the new clause refers to using an item wholly or mainly. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my closing remarks, I just want to place on record my alarm at this government's now fairly frequent tabling of large numbers of amendments at report stage, the short notice, the compressed time for debate and scrutiny, and to be honest, what many of us experience as utter confusion regarding timetabling, which is very dangerous in terms of the precedent that it sets. It's not in the spirit of parliamentary democracy, and I urge the government to withdraw these extra substantial amendments and allow for proper, democratic, sensible and transparent scrutiny that I know our constituents do expect of us.
Yes. Maria Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I rise to follow the Honourable Lady, and I understand the point she's making, though of course we would want to make sure that people listening to this debate were aware of the fact there's 2 days of debate on the bill this week and next week, which I hope will afford some of the scrutiny that the Honourable Lady is rightly calling for. Can I, however, perhaps gently suggest to the Treasury bench that they may want to do some one-to-one meetings with those of us who are interested in a number of the areas that the government has now laid amendments on just a couple of days before this important report stage, so that we can get a proper understanding of what the government is trying to do, and perhaps it would have been prudent to have done that before the report stage.
The question is the Criminal Justice Bill Programme Number 2 motion as on the order paper. As men of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Criminal Justice Bill, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Now.
We begin with Government New Clause 86, with which it will be convenient to take other new clauses, amendments and new schedules as listed on the selection paper. Minister to move New Clause 86, Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I have heard what both of the honourable ladies say and made a careful note, actually. I want to say I think the fact that this is split over 2 days may have contributed to that, but I will take this away and I have listened carefully. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is an honour again to open this debate and bring the Criminal Justice Bill back to the House for this discussion at report stage. It is an important piece of legislation. Its focus is on countering developing criminal threats, intercepting serious organised crime and protecting vulnerable victims. And I want to thank members from both sides, all sides of the House, for their constructive engagement in this bill, as well as the police, leading academics, practising lawyers and campaign groups, some of whom appeared before us at Bill Committee, who have all contributed to its development. There are many topics to discuss today, and I do look forward to hearing the views of members. The Government is bringing forward a number of amendments which we believe are both appropriate and necessary to punish offenders and enhance the protection that victims deserve. I will briefly explain the key Government amendments that are before the House. I will start with those about which I anticipate there will be no dispute. The extension to Northern Ireland of both our new spiking measures at clause 13 of the bill and the statutory aggravating factor for grooming activity in relation to child sexual offences at section 30. New clause 88, which provides for equivalence in sentencing for terrorist offenders between England and Wales and Northern Ireland as a consequence of the irregularity that was identified in the case of the Crown and Perry. Mr Deputy Speaker, may I begin by addressing our provision on the unduly lenient sentencing scheme, which is Government New Clause 89. This extends the time limit for the unduly lenient sentence scheme. Under this amendment, we are extending the overall time limit to 6 weeks. A request must still be submitted by any prospective appellant to the Attorney General's office within the usual 28 days, but the Attorney General's office will have an additional 14 days to consider whether the case is appropriate for submission to the Court of Appeal. In recent years, we have seen the number of cases that are referred to the law officers increase. I think that's in part due to a better awareness of the scheme. We consider it to be in the interests of justice that each application is given due care and attention, even when it is submitted close to the 28-day deadline, and we believe that this clause is a proportionate way of achieving that. Mr Deputy Speaker, let me turn to the issue of attendance at sentencing hearings. A change has been initiated already in this legislation in response to public concerns about high-profile cases such as that of Lucy Letby, Jordan McSweeney, Thomas Cashman, all of whom refused to attend their sentencing hearing.
Will my honourable friend give way on that point?
I will, of course.
Does my honourable friend agree that those cases which rightly have gained a huge amount of public traction are ones that it is absolutely appropriate for the government to be making further announcements and measures on at this stage of the legislation?
Well, I agree with that sentiment entirely. We are creating an express statutory power already at section 28 to compel an offender to attend that sentencing hearing if they have been convicted of a crime for which the maximum sentence is life. But we have also listened to those who are concerned about offences that might not have been caught by this. And I want to confirm that the government has tabled amendments 148 to 150 to extend the measure to all offences that might attract a maximum sentence of 14 years or more. I will, of course.
Friend for giving way, and I'm very grateful to the Lord Chancellor and for the Minister and for other ministers for listening to the case I made at second reading to do precisely this and extend the power. I had a case in my constituency where an offender was convicted of sexually assaulting a child under 13, which carries a 14-year sentence. They hid away in their cell and didn't come to court. Under the original provisions, they wouldn't have been captured. Under these amendments, they would be, and can I welcome that?
Well, Well, can I thank the Honourable Member for North West Norfolk? It was the speech he gave at second reading, Mr Deputy Speaker, that played a major role in the change that we're introducing today. I want to reassure him that the change we're bringing brings into scope most sexual assault cases, terrorist cases and racially aggravated offences, and I can confirm to him that the specific case he raised at second reading will be or would have been brought into scope by the change that he has campaigned for. Just to remind the House, the sanction for non-attendance at a sentencing hearing is up to a maximum of another 2 years in custody. Government new clause 86 creates an offence of creating a sexually explicit deepfake of an adult without their consent. Honourable members will already be aware that sharing of intimate images, whether they are real or fake, is already prescribed under the Online Safety Act. But we consider that we cannot complete the task of protecting people, principally women, unless we add the creation of pseudo-images or deepfakes to that package of protection. Mr Deputy Speaker, in taking this step, we are the first, or if I'm wrong about that, we are among the first national legislatures to do so. Yeah. And we do so because we recognise the inherent risk that is posed by the creation of these images, both to the individual that's depicted and to society more widely. I will give way.
And I know she will have given thought to this, but does she agree with me that there is a problem not just with deepfake sexual images, but more widely deepfake images which purport to show individuals, people, potentially even members of this House, doing and saying things that they haven't, which have no sexual connotations whatsoever?
Minister. I am very grateful to the Honourable Lady, my honourable friend, for raising this. We are encountering a rapidly changing world of deepfake images that can be used for the purposes of manipulating voices to try and influence political attitudes and choices. And I have to make clear that this is a confined amendment which goes only to the creation of sexually explicit images. However, it is my hope, humbly expressed at this dispatch box, that it may provide the gateway and the lever for future development of more law around this. And I thank her for her intervention. Yes, of course.
I'd like to thank the Minister for giving way, but I'd particularly like to thank her for this amendment. It obviously only covers adults because producing such content of children is already illegal. But I'm told that since the government announced their intention to do this, both Apple and Google have already removed from their app stores a number of apps which were enabling the users to produce deepfake nudes. And those applications have been used to create indecent images of children as well as adults. And disabling those apps has already helped to keep the public safe and to significantly improve the safeguarding of children. So just by tabling this amendment, the government has already forced the industry to act in the UK. So thank you.
I thank the honourable member for Chelmsford. That is music to our ears. It was not lost on us that within days of making the announcement, 2 of the major deepfake/nudify sites had blocked access to UK users in anticipation of the fact that even the act of using that site would become a criminal offence under our impending legislation. Of course I will give way, yes.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Can I thank her for her personal championing of this new clause? As she knows, the Science and Innovation Technology Select Committee recommended this, and we benefited from a seminar conducted with the campaigners that Glamour magazine brought together to bring the experience of people right across the country to this focal point. And they deserve credit themselves for having brought this to the House, but the Minister, my honourable friend, does for championing it so brilliantly and bringing it today.
Minister. Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his intervention. I have to also thank the team at Glamour magazine because they led an excellent campaign. I was actually halfway through trying to make this change myself when I became aware of it, but I read the material that they put out. It totally chimed with our objectives, and I know that he welcomed them to Parliament just a few weeks ago. Yes, I will give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? And it's an important issue to be dealt with, intimate image abuse. Can she explain why she hasn't approached it in the same way as her colleagues approached intimate image abuse in the online safety bill, because it was a long fought battle to have the online safety bill